Woo-wee! This Indiana Fever post trying to get people to vote for Kelsey Mitchell for the All Star game. It did not go as planned. It did not go as planned.
It did not go as planned. It absolutely, fundamentally, and spectacularly did not go as planned. Let us start right there and cut through all the noise, all the public relations spin, and all the carefully constructed narratives that the Indiana Fever front office desperately wants you to believe. Right now, in real time, we are witnessing a growing, glaring, and deeply concerning disconnect between the Indiana Fever organization and its intensely passionate, highly intelligent fan base. And let me tell you, it is becoming utterly impossible to ignore with every single passing game, with every blown lead, and with every contested late clock isolation shot that clanks off the rim. For weeks now, this organization has been working overtime behind the scenes. They have tried to present this picture-perfect, flawless image of a unified locker room, a cohesive unit built on an unshakable foundation of trust, mutual respect, and undeniable chemistry. They desperately want you to look at the shiny promotional posters plastered all over town. They want you to consume their carefully curated social media campaigns, watch the smiling practice videos, and just blindly believe that everything inside that building is perfectly fine. They want you to think this is just a young team taking its natural lumps. But the fans, the people who actually buy the tickets, the people who actually tune in night after night, the people who understand the game of basketball on a molecular level, they are watching a completely different movie. They feel, and quite frankly they can see with their own two eyes, that the raw reality unfolding on the 94 feet of hardwood tells a far more complicated, frustrating, and potentially destructive story. The recent All-Star voting campaign dedicated to Kelsey Mitchell became the ultimate flashpoint. It was the match dropped in the powder keg that exposed just how massively wide the gap between the front office and the fan base has actually grown. The organization, likely thinking they were doing a good deed, released a heavy promotional campaign encouraging their fan base to push Kelsey Mitchell into the All-Star game. They put the graphics together, they fired off the tweets, and they fully expected their loyal, rabid supporters to simply fall in line, click the link, and rally behind the cause. Now, let us be perfectly clear. On paper, in a vacuum, this seemed like a routine, entirely harmless piece of franchise marketing. Every single organization in professional sports promotes its veterans. Every franchise pushes for all-star recognition for its leading scorers. It is standard operating procedure. But the front office fundamentally misread the room. They severely miscalculated the temperature of their own fan base. Because the timing, the execution, and the context of this particular campaign struck a deep, raw nerve with a fan base that has been watching the brutal reality of this team's offensive system closely, painfully, and exhaustingly all season long.
I love her. When she gets the ball, I can go to the fridge and get a beer. No.
The fan base responded in a way the front office clearly, unequivocally did not anticipate. You see, the Indiana Fever do not just have casual fans anymore. Because of the Caitlin Clark effect, this team is being watched by millions of knowledgeable supporters who understand the rhythm, the pacing, the spacing, and the complex geometry of modern championship basketball. And the response to this voting campaign was not just a polite decline. It was overwhelmingly critical. It was a digital avalanche. Fans flooded the team's social media platforms. But they did not come with blind votes of support or generic cheering. They came armed with pointed, analytical, and brutal feedback about what watching this offense actually feels like on a nightly basis. They pointed out, with clinical precision, that when the basketball stalls in isolation, when the ball sticks in one place, the entire offensive flow of the Indiana Fever grinds to an absolute screeching halt. It devolves into a sluggish, predictable, and painful-to-watch brand of basketball. It often becomes this repetitive, uninspired sequence of one player relentlessly dribbling the air out of the basketball while the shot clock bleeds away, second by agonizing second. And as that clock ticks down, the energy of the arena, the momentum of the game, and the spirit of the team visibly fades into nothingness, resulting almost every time in a frustrating, heavily contested, wildly low percentage shot. Many fans openly and loudly express that the offense feels suffocatingly stagnant in those stretches. It produces absolutely zero off-ball movement against a set defense. It is predictable, it is easy to guard, And they argued passionately that this is the exact opposite of the dynamic, free-flowing, lethal, modern style of basketball that they are paying their hard-earned money to see.
Because they're about to make it a 98-94 game. Caitlin Clark comes back in. You're thinking to yourself, you're obviously going to go to Caitlin Clark, right? Because for the second game in a row, there's no way you're not going to the best player on your team, right?
Now, let us pause for a second because we have to be fair, we have to be balanced, and we have to be objective here because this point is incredibly important. Kelsey Mitchell is a genuinely, undeniably talented scorer. She is a bucket getter in the truest sense of the word. She is fully capable of getting blazing hot, catching fire, and putting up points in massive bunches against the best defenders in the world. And on this very night that we are going to discuss, she went out there and finished with a highly respectable 19 points. She is a valuable contributor to this roster. Absolutely nobody with a basketball brain is disputing her raw talent. The visceral frustration pouring out from the fan base is not born out of some malicious idea that Mitchell is a bad player. That is not the argument. The frustration is deeply rooted in the broader philosophy of shot selection, offensive flow, and situational awareness. The fans are screaming from the rooftops that when the ball sticks in one player's hands for 14, 15, 16 seconds of the shot clock, the other four professional basketball players on the floor are instantly reduced to nothing more than high-priced spectators. They are just standing around watching. And when one of those spectators standing motionless in the corner happens to be Caitlin Clark, the absolute most gravitational, defense-bending, terrifying offensive force to enter the league in a generation, that fan frustration does not just double. It becomes amplified tenfold. It feels like an insult to the game of basketball itself. So, the organization's carefully crafted all-star narrative collided head-on, at 100 miles an hour, with a fan base that is desperately, passionately trying to rally around the actual cornerstone of their franchise, the very reason they are tuning in, Caitlin Clark. But the social media backlash, the angry tweets, and the comment sections, that is only one tiny fraction of a much larger, much more vital conversation. The internet is one thing, but the real flashpoint, the absolute defining moment that fueled the most intense, fiery debate across the entire sports landscape, happened right on the hardwood. It happened in the arena, under the blinding stadium lights, where there is absolutely nowhere to hide behind a PR statement. It happened in a moment where the stakes were at their absolute heart-pounding highest, and the pressure in the building was suffocating enough to crush a diamond. We have to talk, in deep detail, about the closing moments of what was a crucial, exhausting, deeply contested overtime bloodbath against the Chicago Sky. Now, for the record, the Indiana Fever ultimately won this basketball game by a final score of 114-106. But do not let that final box score fool you for a single second. That final score does not even begin to tell the full, harrowing story of how incredibly stressful, chaotic, and disorganized this game truly was.
Look like you hate
why
her
she
so
changed the
much.
play to get Kelsey Mitchell the ball. Caitlin Clark, look at her face. She's lost all hope, all faith in Stephanie White. She said no. You know the play. Oh my gosh.
Wow.
Let us set the stage properly, so you can feel the gravity of the situation. The Indiana Fever came out of the gates in the first half looking like an absolute juggernaut. They looked like a completely different basketball team. They were building a commanding, dominant lead behind crisp, beautiful ball movement and a relentlessly aggressive offensive tempo. They were clicking on every single cylinder. They were sharing the basketball, making the extra pass, finding the open shooter. For a fleeting, glorious moment, they looked exactly like the dangerous, unstoppable modern offensive machine that everyone in the world believes they have the potential to be. They were putting on a clinic. But then, the locker room doors opened for the second half, the third quarter began, and what transpired next was an unmitigated, catastrophic disaster. The Chicago Sky, a team that walked into that arena sitting at a dismal 4 wins and 9 losses, a team struggling to find their own identity, suddenly erupted. They exploded for a staggering, jaw-dropping 39 points in that single 12-minute quarter alone. Think about that. 39 points surrendered in one quarter. The Fever defense completely, totally collapsed. It evaporated. The defensive rotations, which were so sharp in the first half, suddenly became a full step slow. Players were missing assignments, failing to communicate through screens, and giving up wide-open layups. And just like that, a comfortable blowout victory evaporated into thin air. Suddenly, a game that should have been put on ice by the middle of the third quarter transformed into a terrifying white-knuckle, possession-by-possession battle for pure survival. The tension in that building was so thick you could cut it with a machete. The momentum had completely flipped, the crowd was on edge, and the game was eventually pushed all the way into an extra grueling overtime period. And through all of that sheer chaos, through the blown leads, the defensive lapses, and the mounting panic, one single player kept the Indiana Fever afloat. One player refused to let the ship sink into the abyss. Caitlin Clark, the engine of this entire franchise. The generational prodigy who has quite literally shifted the entire economic and cultural landscape of women's professional basketball. In the midst of all that dysfunction, she delivered an absolute, undeniable masterpiece of a performance. She was magnificent. She finished the night with a historic 32-point double-double, adding 10 assists and 7 rebounds to her stat line. She was manipulating the defense, threading impossible passes through the needle, and hitting shots from different area codes. But let me tell you something, despite all those flashy numbers, perhaps the most remarkable, awe-inspiring statistic of the entire night was her grueling work at the free throw line. She was a completely flawless 15 for 15. I want you to really stop and think about the magnitude of that for a moment. Put yourself in her shoes, in the most pressure-packed, high-stakes, nerve-shredding environment imaginable, with the entire game hanging precariously in the balance, with the opposing crowd screaming, with millions watching on television. She stepped to that solitary line 15 separate times. And she did not miss a single one. Not one. That is the very dictionary definition of ice-cold composure under fire. That is the hallmark of a cold-blooded assassin. That is the trait of a legendary closer.
Wow. That is not the look. That is not the reaction of a trustworthy relationship. Of course, in public, they're never going to admit that. Oh, everything's great. Both parties are gonna act like everything's fine. All the other teammates are going to act like everything's fine.
Now, in any rational, logical basketball environment on planet Earth, in any system where winning the basketball game is the ultimate, unquestioned priority, the strategy in crunch time is beautifully, elegantly simple. You do not overthink it. You do not try to reinvent the wheel. You take the basketball and you put it squarely in the hands of number 22. You give it to the player who can bend the entire opposing defense to her sheer will. You give it to the player who processes the game like a grandmaster, who sees passing lanes and plays developing 3, 4, 5 steps ahead of every other human being on the floor. You give it to the player who just definitively proved 15 times over that she absolutely will not miss when the pressure is at its peak. It is basic basketball mathematics. The fans sitting in the nosebleeds know it. The opposing defense knows it, and they specifically tailor their entire defensive game plan around that terrifying reality. And most importantly, Caitlin Clark knows it. She knows who she is. She steps onto that court in the final 2 minutes fully expecting to close the damn show. She expects to take on the burden, orchestrate the offense, take the critical shot, or make the brilliant read, and secure the victory. She is fully, entirely expecting her coaching staff to trust her with the fate of the team when the chips are down. But then, the unthinkable happened. In one critical do-or-die late-game possession, with the margin of error reduced to absolute zero, the coaching staff made a decision that left thousands of fans in the arena and millions watching at home utterly baffled. They left the basketball world scratching its collective head. Instead of running the offense through their red-hot generational talent, Stephanie White and the play callers on the sideline decided to get cute. They outsmarted themselves. They drew up an action specifically designed to bypass Caitlin Clark and get the ball to Kelsey Mitchell in a heavily contested, dangerous spot on the floor. They consciously, deliberately chose to move away from the player who is best positioned, both mentally and physically, to orchestrate the offense in that exact critical moment. And what happened next? Exactly what you would expect to happen when you force a square peg into a round hole against a set defense in crunch time. It was a complete breakdown. The play instantly fell apart. Why? Because the Chicago Sky defense was not fooled for a microsecond. They saw it coming from a mile away. The passing lane collapsed. The pass was frantically forced into a thick web of defensive traffic, and the ball was disastrously fumbled away. A priceless, critical possession was completely wasted at the absolute worst possible time in the basketball game. To millions of people watching, it looked like a highly questionable, arguably indefensible decision to intentionally move away from the team's most lethal, unstoppable option during a stretch where the game was literally on the line.
In case you haven't noticed, we're down to this happening on a game in and game out basis now.
Now, let us take a breath and play devil's advocate for a moment, because in fairness to the coaching staff, late-game play calling is widely considered one of the most difficult, thankless jobs in all of professional sports. It is incredibly tough. Defenses are smart. They know the ball is supposed to go to the star player. They trap, they double, they deny. So, occasionally, coaches will design a play to use that superstar's immense gravity as a decoy, hoping the entire defense shifts, thereby freeing up a secondary option for an easy, uncontested look. There is, historically, a legitimate, widely accepted coaching theory behind using misdirection in these moments. We have seen it work in championship games, but here is the cold, hard truth. The execution on this specific play was abysmal. It simply did not work. It failed spectacularly. And in professional sports, it is a results-driven business. When you make a controversial call to use your best player as a decoy, and it blows up in your face in a moment that's critical, the intense second-guessing from fans, from media members, and from analysts does not just become likely, it becomes absolutely inevitable. The coaching staff opened themselves up to a tidal wave of justified criticism. However, the turnover itself, the physical loss of the basketball, was not the real story here. The fumble was just a symptom of the disease. The moment that actually captured the entire basketball world's attention, the 5-second clip that went instantly viral, that fans downloaded, clipped, and replayed over and over and over again on every platform imaginable, was what happened immediately after the referee's whistle blew. The television cameras, zoomed in tight, captured Caitlin Clark's immediate, raw, unfiltered reaction to the play call and the subsequent turnover. She did not politely jog back on defense. She did not clap her hands and say, "We'll get them next time." She forcefully threw her hands up in the air in visible, undeniable disbelief. It was a massive gesture of sheer, unadulterated exasperation that spoke absolute volumes without her ever having to utter a single syllable. You can pull up the high-definition footage for yourself right now and clearly see the overwhelming frustration etched deeply across her face. To any seasoned observer of the game, this was not just the standard run-of-the-mill frustration of a player who is upset about a blown play or a missed shot in a tight game. No, this looked remarkably different. It looked exactly like the deeply rooted reaction of a franchise superstar who fundamentally, philosophically, and intensely disagreed with the late-game decision-making of her own coaching staff. And it did not stop there. As the players slowly gathered on the sideline, walking back to the bench during the immediate aftermath of the play, the tension radiating off the screen was palpable. You could feel the awkwardness. The footage shows Caitlin clearly, visibly frustrated with the coaching staff. Her posture, her facial expressions, her complete body language was loudly broadcasting a highly difficult, deeply uncomfortable moment of severe disconnect between a transcendent star player and the rigid system she is currently being asked to operate within. This is not some manufactured media narrative. This is raw video evidence, and this is exactly the kind of footage that the organization's public relations department will severely struggle to spin, manipulate, or sweep under the rug. Because it captures a completely raw, honest, mask-off moment of boiling frustration from the single most important human being in their entire organization. Listen to me very closely. When a superstar of Caitlin Clark's unprecedented magnitude, a player who carries the weight of the entire league on her shoulders, shows that level of visible, public disagreement and annoyance with her coach, it immediately raises massive, blinking red light questions about the internal chemistry, the power dynamics, and the level of trust within the entire franchise. In the coming days, Stephanie White and this coaching staff will undoubtedly face incredibly tough, uncomfortable questions from the media about exactly why she chose to divert the offense away from her most lethal, red-hot offensive weapon in the most crucial moment of the game. And to be abundantly clear, to be totally fair, this entire controversy is not necessarily about one single bad play call. Coaches are human. They make questionable, heavily debated decisions in every single game, across every single sport, in every single professional league in the world. One isolated play call, no matter how bad, does not permanently define a season, nor does it destroy a relationship on its own. The real reason this particular moment resonates so deeply the reason it has set the internet on fire, is because it perfectly, seamlessly fits into a much broader, much more troubling pattern of behavior that incredibly observant fans have been noticing and pointing out all year long. It is the steady, slow accumulation of these frustrating moments. It is not any single event in isolation, it is the compounding effect of watching the offense stall, watching the superstar get marginalized in key moments, and watching the rigid system refuse to adapt. That is what builds the overarching narrative. We have all seen versions of this exact scenario play out before in the history of professional sports. It is a tale as old as time. We have seen it in the NBA, we have seen it in the NFL. We have witnessed the exact timeline of what happens when tension between a truly transcendent, once-in-a-lifetime talent and a stubborn coaching staff slowly builds over time through a continuous series of small, seemingly minor frustrations. It is like water dripping on a stone. Eventually, the stone cracks. When the foundation of trust between a generational player and an organization is fundamentally strained, it creates an incredibly toxic, difficult dynamic. And if that dynamic is left unaddressed, if egos refuse to step aside, if honest conversations do not happen, it may very well grow into a catastrophic situation that is far more significant and far more destructive down the road. The healthiest, most successful championship organizations in the history of sports are the ones that have the humility and the self-awareness to recognize these glaring warning signs incredibly early. They address the friction head-on through radical, honest communication, and most importantly, they show a genuine willingness to evolve and adapt their schemes to fit their elite personnel. The struggling franchises, the ones stuck in the basement of the standings for decades, they are the ones who stubbornly ignore the glaring signs. They enforce their rigid systems at all costs, ignoring the reality in front of them, until the superstar's frustration boils over, the trust is shattered, and the damage becomes far too massive to ever repair. Let me tell you exactly what the current reality is. The Indiana Fever are standing directly at a monumental, franchise-defining, pivotal crossroads. They are currently asking a 22-year-old Caitlin Clark to shoulder the immense, unprecedented, crushing burden of carrying virtually the entire league's media spotlight, ticket sales, and cultural relevance. They are asking her to be the face of a revolution. And because they are asking that of her, the specific way this organization chooses to support her on the basketball court, particularly in these excruciatingly high-pressure, game-deciding moments, matters enormously. It matters more than anything else they do. There is a very real, incredibly profound philosophical question lying at the very heart of all of this tension. And it is a question that the front office and the coaching staff must answer, and they must answer it immediately. Do you have the courage to build your entire offensive system around the brilliant, unteachable instincts of a generational point guard? Do you hand her the keys to the Ferrari, giving her the ultimate freedom to read, react, manipulate the defense, and create magic on the fly? Or do you stubbornly demand that this once-in-a-lifetime transcendent talent shrink herself to fit neatly inside the restrictive box of a more traditional, rigid, structured, veteran-oriented system that was clearly designed for a bygone era of basketball? If you look at basketball history, there is technically no automatically correct answer to that question. Some legendary dynastic teams thrived on absolute militant structure, rigid discipline, and running plays perfectly by the book. Think of the old-school motion offenses. Other legendary teams achieved greatness by completely taking the training wheels off, embracing the chaos, and fully unleashing the pure, unadulterated individual brilliance of their greatest stars. But let me make one thing crystal clear. What absolutely all of the most successful, ring-winning, championship-caliber organizations have in common is that they figure out a way to completely maximize their single best player. They elevate their superstar. They do not minimize her. They do not use her as a decoy when the game is on the line and she is shooting perfectly from the stripe. But right now, every single game seems to feature at least one glaring moment where this franchise star's frustration becomes completely visible to the world. A moment where Clark stands at the top of the key, looks around the floor, drops her shoulders, and appears to be mentally exhausted, fighting a deeply difficult two-front battle. On one front, she is physically competing against elite, aggressive, world-class opponents who are doing everything in their power to stop her. And on the second front, she is simultaneously trying to battle through the tactical friction and the philosophical limitations embedded within her very own team's offensive system. The die-hard fans see it plainly. The rest of the league, including rival general managers and players, sees it. The national media sees it. And you better believe, without a shadow of a doubt, that Caitlin Clark feels it deeply, more intimately, and more painfully than anyone else in that arena. The severe backlash against the All Star voting campaign was not just a bunch of angry tweets. It was a loud, clear, unmistakable distress signal from the fan base. They were screaming that they want systemic change. The visible sideline frustration, the questionable late-game play calling, the blown leads, all of these elements have only dumped gasoline on the fire and amplified those deep concerns to deafening levels. But listen to me, because here is the immensely encouraging reality for the Indiana Fever fan base, and it is critically important to end this analysis on a note of genuine perspective rather than pure apocalyptic doom. When you look at the root of all these issues, absolutely none of these current problems are fundamentally about a lack of basketball talent. Let me repeat that. This is not a talent problem. This roster is absolutely loaded with premium blue-chip basketball talent. Caitlin Clark is undeniably a generational superstar, a wizard with the basketball who can do things nobody else on the planet can do. And do not forget about Aaliyah Boston, who was an absolute monstrous force of nature in this very same game against Chicago, pouring in 34 dominant points and grabbing 12 tough rebounds. She is a foundational, unstoppable franchise centerpiece in her own absolute right. The puzzle pieces are completely, absolutely there. What this Indiana Fever team is currently dealing with, at its core, is a deeply complex chemistry, trust, and communication challenge. And the good news is, unlike a lack of talent or a lack of height, those are entirely fixable problems. They are curable. They improve with the passage of time, with countless hours of practice repetition, with brutal, honest, ego-free conversations held behind closed locker room doors. And most importantly, they improve only if you have a coaching staff that is genuinely willing to look in the mirror, swallow their pride, and evolve its philosophical approach to perfectly match the unique elite personnel sitting on their bench. If the Indiana Fever organization can somehow navigate this current storm, if they can tear down the walls and build a much stronger, infinitely more trusting, symbiotic relationship with their franchise cornerstone, this basketball team has all the raw, explosive materials necessary to become something truly, terrifyingly special in this league. They could become a dynasty. But the lesson to be learned right now is simple. Yet it is absolutely crucial to their survival. You have to boldly support, protect, and fully empower your franchise player. Period. End of discussion. Especially when the clock is ticking down, the crowd is on its feet, and you are in the chaotic closing minutes of a desperately tight game. The entire basketball world is watching this situation incredibly closely. Every single move this franchise makes is under a microscope. And the philosophical path this franchise actively chooses to walk down from here will definitively shape the entire future of basketball in Indiana. This is no longer just a cute human interest story about a young team trying to find its rhythm and learn how to win. This is a massive, high-stakes narrative about whether a professional sports organization can actually rise to the immense pressure of the moment. It is about whether they have the competence, the vision, and the humility to fully support, unleash, and maximize the once-in-a-lifetime generational talent they were incredibly lucky enough to draft. They must act swiftly, decisively, and correctly before that precious championship window of opportunity, which opens so rarely in professional sports, begins to slowly, permanently close. The stakes literally could not be any higher. Every decision from this point forward will be fiercely analyzed and permanently etched into the history of this franchise. So, as we watch this high-stakes drama continue to unfold on the national stage, I have to ask you, the fans who watch the tape and know the game, what do you think is the right path forward? Should the Indiana Fever coaching staff swallow their pride, scrap the decoy plays, and definitively hand the absolute keys to the offense completely over to Caitlin Clark in crunch time, letting her live or die by her own unparalleled instincts? Or, despite all the visible frustration, the blown leads, and the clunky execution, is there still some hidden long-term value in the rigid, structured, systematic approach that the coaching staff is desperately trying to build and enforce? Let the debate rage on. Drop your raw, unfiltered, completely honest thoughts down in the comments below. Absolutely smash that subscribe button to stay plugged into this developing situation, and let me know exactly where you stand on this massive, league-altering controversy.